Hey everybody, as you've seen this whole week, we've been doing State of the SECs. For Auburn, though, we wanted to do something a little differently, so we decided to host a Zoom call with some Plainsman alumni. We've got Zach, Olivia, Bryce, Jake Wright, Christian, and myself. So yeah, I guess if anyone else wants to say anything else before we get into our topics, go ahead.
Nope, let's get going.
Good.
All right, sounds good. So I guess the first thing on the agenda, a lot of stuff recently, as today, as we're recording this, stuff with scheduling has come out. Big Ten is going to do a conference only. ACC is thinking the exact same way. So I guess kind of excluding those games just for now. What are the Auburn games to y'all that are the most interesting on the schedule?
I'll start it off, I guess. I would have picked North Carolina, but obviously that game's not going to happen. So because of that, I'm going to go right down the board, and I'm going to go with Ole Miss, actually. As of right now, if things don't change, it's the first game on the schedule, and with kind of an inexperienced defensive line and secondary, containing Plumlee could prove difficult for a team that barely took down Ole Miss last year at home. Obviously, there might not be fans on the road, but they'll still probably be on the road. And Ole Miss has a new coach, too, so it'll be interesting to kind of see what happens there. But I think Ole Miss could prove to be a really interesting game for Auburn this year.
Well, I agree with Kiffin. You never know what to expect from him. That's actually the game that they're supposed to retire Eli Manning's number, be the third retired number in Ole Miss history. So that would have been a raucous environment. And maybe that can be something that would be in Auburn's favor if there is only 10,000 fans or none or whatever it may be with the situation with fans. But for me, I keep going down the schedule and assume everything stays the same. One of the biggest games I think of the year will be Texas A&M. 2 years ago, whenever Auburn hosted them, they made the miraculous comeback in the fourth quarter. Last year's game was pretty much in control. I think A&M came back at the end, but it was still a comfortable victory for Auburn. And A&M, a lot of people think this year's going to be the breakout team in the SEC West with Jimbo having his third year at A&M. Kellen Mond, another year as senior. People like him. He's been at A&M what seems like forever. So they finally have the recruiting in place, the staff, the continuity, the quarterback that a lot of people think they'll be the team out of the West to challenge LSU and Alabama. And if Auburn wants to prove that they're still in the top three in the SEC West or at least third behind Alabama and LSU, then they have to win that game at A&M versus A&M.
I completely agree with Jake. That's my most interesting game because I feel like Texas A&M is always a litmus test for Auburn and how the season's going to go. And especially at home, if Auburn loses to Texas A&M, more often than not, it's going to be a mediocre year. But if they're able to win versus Texas A&M, then it's probably going to be a good year.
Yeah, I'm going to take the week before that, and it's kind of a basic choice, but Auburn versus Georgia. This is the first year that they've moved Auburn to Georgia and to the middle of the season. And I feel like that is a huge game, especially with teams not being able to practice and everything like that. And Georgia has a new transfer quarterback coming in from Wake Forest. And so if he isn't able to get acclimated with the system, especially with the shortened schedule that's going to be happening, then Auburn has a chance to actually beat Georgia early in the season since they have an experienced quarterback that is leading them.
Well, and Zach, I think it'll be interesting to see with Georgia. We know Newman has the arm and the physical attributes, but with the new OC too. I know he wasn't there last year, but there was a lot of complaints in Georgia about the lack of just creativity in the playbook. And so with Todd Monken coming on, I just wonder if they'll open up the offense and kind of throw the ball more downfield, which would be more suited for Jamie Newman's skill set.
Yeah, that's also a good point.
I think I'm going to have to go with Ole Miss, actually. I think it's going to be, assuming that they don't play any non-conference games, that'll be the first game. It's on the road. And then I also think it's going to be that really big moment where you get to see how things come together with so many different changes. The offensive line, the defense, with Chad Morris play calling. I don't know if it's going to be their toughest game, but I think it's going to be a game where you're really going to see how this comes together, considering you haven't had normal practices. You haven't had this kind of really a big moment where this team has come together to really see how they mesh and how they work together. I think that's going to be really if they have a lot of struggles in that, I think it could get in their head a little bit for the rest of the season. And I think it's going to determine if this is going to be a building year for Auburn or if it's going to be one where they can still stay consistent.
Yeah, and with Ole Miss being, I think it is going to be the first game now with the schedule coming out, with the possibility the SEC is going to do, or that the ACC said that they're going to do only conference games. So that could be the first game of the season for Auburn. And so and then with limited practice, they didn't even get a spring practice and everything like that. So I mean, it's gonna be a tough match if you just come in and be like, all right, here's an SEC opponent to come play.
I know that, guys, you said this, and I don't know that you're wrong, but I don't know if when they come out with the new schedules, assuming that they do conference-only games and the UNC game is canceled because they're playing conference-only games, would they go to 9 conference games? Do you push some games up? Would Ole Miss still be the first game? Because I don't know if, say there's an SEC game scheduled on the 12th, would 2 other teams play in Auburn have a bye week that week? I think there would need to be some uniformity between the schedule of kind of changing some games around, maybe keeping some games on some certain dates, but you can't just cancel the non-conference games and leave those weeks blank, because then a team like Auburn wouldn't start their season until September 19th if that is what happens. So it could very well be the first game, but I think they would probably try to go to 9 conference games or maybe 10 if that happens. I guess we'll just have to see, and then you would have some changes in the schedule.
Yeah, the thing is, you just don't know at this point. I mean, this is all stuff that's happening today, and the Big Ten was the first to announce it, and they haven't even really laid out plans like what the schedule is going to look like. They just said they're doing conference only, so it's just up in there at this point.
No, and I kind of want to bring it back to A&M, because Texas A&M, Auburn is actually my pick as well. I agree with what y'all said, though. I really do think that's kind of Auburn's. Obviously, they'll have Georgia the week before, if the schedule stays the way it is. But I just think that A&M game, A&M and Auburn kind of seem to always be on the exact same. They always, the last couple of years anyway, they seem to be kind of right there with each other. And looking at both teams' schedule, A&M usually the last 2 years has just had really tough schedules. Auburn has as well. But just looking at A&M's conference schedule that they have right now, they very well could just be a two-loss team. But Auburn could give them that third loss. And then from there, because Auburn still has Georgia, Alabama, and LSU on the schedule, which are all tough games. Outside of Auburn, though, really, every SEC game is tough, but really for A&M, the only 2 challenging games on their schedule are Alabama and LSU. So that one could really determine who finishes potentially third and fourth in the SEC this year.
Well, and I'll mention this, guys. I don't know if he would have to get a waiver. I haven't looked too much into the situation, but could Auburn, when they host Kentucky the week before Georgia, be facing Joey Gatewood? I don't know. I know they have Terry Wilson coming back, and I believe they have another quarterback that played last year whenever Terry Wilson got hurt. So Kentucky's got some solid options at quarterback, but if Gatewood does end up getting a waiver, if he even needs it, and plays, will he be the starter, and will he come to Auburn and play if that game obviously takes place like we're expecting it to right now? So that's another interesting storyline within the SEC if that is to happen.
Yeah.
All right, and on that note, does anyone else have any kind of final thoughts on the schedule or anything like that, or before we move on to the next topic?
I think the only other thing to look out for is, LSU and Bama back-to-back, how the team differs their approach to the Iron Bowl, because, for as long as I can remember, they've had kind of give me a game against Samford, Liberty, whoever it may be, before the Iron Bowl to kind of get ready. But instead, you're just back-to-back LSU, Bama. So it'll be interesting to see how the team prepares for that.
And I think Alabama doesn't have their cupcake game before the Iron Bowl either. They play A&M, I believe, the week before. So it's not just Auburn the week before the Iron Bowl. It will be the Alabama side of the rivalry as well that has a challenging opponent in a week that they ordinarily in the past haven't.
Well, I think that November schedule or that November slate for Alabama is just tough in general, because they have LSU. Right now they have Tennessee Martin on the schedule, but who knows with that one. But then it's Alabama. Just in the month of November, it's LSU, A&M, and then Auburn. So those are 3 tough games right there for Alabama.
I do have 2
things to consider with the no non-conference games is how many games are you able to lose if you play a full SEC slate?
Mm-hmm.
That's very true. There might not be if there's a playoff, there might not be an SEC team in there with people beating up on each other and just playing conference games every single week.
I do have one or two more questions, not necessarily about the schedule, but there isn't non-conference games. What happens with Auburn and the payout from the Chick-fil-A game? I know that game can be at times more than a host home game because the sponsors Chick-fil-A playing in that game. You get I don't know what it is, Jake or Christian. You might $3, $4, $5 million bucks. So what happens with that to the budget? And then what happens? Does Auburn have to pay still and buy out the contracts of Southern Miss, UMass, Alcorn State? I mean, that would be significant cost as well, $3, $4, $5, $6 million, I would think, if they're paying each team $1 million or so to play. So that's a question that I've had that I don't have an answer for, but I think it just is interesting to see how that plays out with the loss of revenue for the smaller schools that desperately need it, and then the loss of revenue that would be significant as well if Auburn doesn't get paid out for the Chick-fil-A kickoff game.
And as far as the smaller schools, I mean, not to get off Auburn, but a lot of those schools will lose programs and not be able to have a football season this year because they're not going to play anybody.
Plus, we've already seen some schools just cancel football outright. Morehouse up in Atlanta already canceled. So, I mean, we don't know how many other small schools are going to have to do the exact same thing they did.
Not to hijack your questions, Jake, but how do you guys feel about a spring football slate?
I don't care. Just give me football. Just please. Like that's all I ask. So yeah, like spring football, I mean, like it's gonna be tough to like actually sit down and like work out the logistics of it and everything like that. But I mean, if that's the only way that it's like gonna be able to like football to be played, then like it gives us more time to like to make it safer and make it everything and make better decisions about it, then like I'm all for it.
Well, Eric, one of you guys go ahead if you want to.
I was just going to say, I think it's tough, though, if you move it to spring because then you either have to move basketball as a fall sport or because basketball, that'll be right during, football could bump up. Hypothetically, the football season playoff could bump up right against March Madness. So I don't really know. Sports fans would love that, but I don't know if you could really pull that off.
I mean, hypothetically, you could have basketball, baseball, and football all at the same time.
Well, the way to look at it is there's a lot of logistical hurdles that have to take place because you'll lose another spring practice, which I know coaches would frown upon, even though you are playing. You would lose the instruction of spring practice and everything that goes with that. You probably wouldn't be able to play a full season in the spring because you can't go up until May and then has kids to turn around and come back for fall camp in late July, early August of next year. So there's hurdles with that. Would Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, kids play in the spring that are going to go to the NFL? I don't know necessarily about anybody from Auburn that would have that situation because there aren't that many, surefire top 10 draft picks next year on Auburn's team. But as a college sports as a whole, that would be a problem. And then the last problem would be you would have to go to ESPN and CBS and your cable partners and see if they would be willing, I would think, because in the fall you'll have some sports, but in the spring, do they have the capability and the airtime and the contracts with other sports to where they can put you on TV and you can still make the TV revenue that you would have made in the fall? Because that's what it all boils down to. If you don't get the TV revenue in the spring that you would have in the fall, then I don't think there's any chance that they play because all of this is dependent upon revenue. So I guess that's just some of the concerns or maybe setbacks of pushing it back to the spring. And the thing is, spring would be a lot better for giving it some more time for possibly a vaccine and fans in the stands, but there's no guarantee in that either. So you're just kind of kicking the can and hoping, and maybe down the road something like that would be developed to where there could be fans and a safe season come February, March, whenever it may be.
I think the other tough thing to think about with football in the fall too is the recruits. I mean, these guys are going to early enroll in December. So then what do? They just sit there on the sideline while the team plays? Like, what are they supposed to be doing? So that becomes another interesting obstacle for spring football.
It's a logistical nightmare is football in the spring. So yeah.
So is a pandemic. So anything's possible.
Very true. Very true.
All right, Joel, and I guess might be a bit of an awkward pivot, but the next topic I wanted to ask about was like if football does happen in the fall or maybe spring, like we just talked about, you know, for Auburn, who's kind of a key player or breakout player to y'all, either on offense or defense?
I gotta say Monday.
Oh no, yeah, go ahead.
Losing Noah Benogany, Jeremiah Denson, he's gonna be the guy to look at in the secondary, and in a pretty much a younger defense for Auburn, that's gonna be huge.
Who is it that you said, Bryce?
Smoke Monday.
Smoke Monday. So yeah, I have somebody else in the secondary that I think is going to be he's stepping up. He's probably going to step up as the number one corner going into the year. And that's Roger Mccreery. I mean, he was the PFF's highest, or had Auburn's PFF's highest coverage grade at an 81.1 for returning players. So he's going to need to step up for this Auburn defense to like actually be somewhat good, because I mean he's going to be lining up against the number one receivers in the SEC.
So I'm going to touch on a defensive player. I have an offensive player too, but we'll wrap back to that. Sticking in secondary, I actually really am curious to see what happens with Devin Barrett. I mean, he's bounced around a lot since arriving at Auburn. He came as a running back, got a little bit of a look at wide receiver, and then finally moved to cornerback in 2018, and he was a reserve last year. But, I mean, he's just such a freak athlete. I think he's going to find his way onto the field, whether it's at CB2 behind Roger Mccreery or maybe CB3 behind Nehemiah Pritchett or Marco Domio. I think some way he's going to find his way onto the field this year, and I think he could be a really talented cornerback.
I go to a different position. The secondary, that's a valid point that you all make, in that you're losing a couple guys and there's some questions and concerns and somebody's going to have to step up. But a player that I want to look at is a guy that has been hurt a couple times, and we hear about his physical attributes and the way he plays. It's Daquan Newkirk. He's been just kind of ravaged with injuries throughout his past several years at Auburn. I think an Achilles and a couple other things. And so if he can put it all together, they're looking for help on that defensive line as well, losing a couple guys, especially in some high draft choices in Marlon Davidson and Derrick Brown, obviously. So who's going to step up at that position? Tackle, where do they play him? I think they moved him inside and he's playing some tackle, but he's light enough and quick enough, I think, that they could play him on the edge. And not to mention that they lost Nick Coe as well, even though he didn't have the year last year that he would have hoped. So there's a lot of production being lost, and I don't know if he'll be the game changer that maybe some people think, and maybe he will be, but I'm interested to see which way it goes for him, and if he can stay healthy, what he is able to do.
I think it's interesting everyone so far has gone defensively, because I went offense. Anthony Schwartz is my pick. You know, he's been productive his first 2 years on Auburn. But I really think they need to find and he's been a solid number 2 guy. But I kind of still think that Auburn fans, maybe I'm wrong here, but I feel like fans really are kind of expecting more out of him. More touches, maybe just more production. So I'm excited to see what Chad Morris can do with him.
That was actually
go ahead.
That was actually my pick too, Jake, was Anthony Schwartz. I'm really intrigued to see what he can do. I mean, we know Chad Morris is big on passing game, and we've seen Anthony Schwartz and Bo Nix make really amazing plays together when you can get those big plays. And I think you have the chance to really see some consistent breakout moments from Anthony Schwartz. I think he's a guy that can make a play keep going with his speed and all that. So I would really like to see him take this moment and really take that offense and bring it somewhere.
Yeah, I'm kind of mad. Mine was Anthony Schwartz too. So I had a cool stat that I found and researched for. Last year, he was only in the FBS. He was the only receiver with 10 yards per carry and 10 yards per reception, with at least 40 receptions and 10 carries. Shows that he has the volume, but even with the volume, he produces, and he has big play potential. But he only had 41 receptions last year and 11 carries. That's just, he needs more. Mm-hmm. Like he needs more touches, and I don't know why they aren't force feeding him the ball. Almost, I mean, I just feel like he's too dynamic to not give the ball to. I mean, just throw him a screen pass and get him in open space or anything.
And he's
yeah, exactly. So Yeah, I would. That was my biggest. Like, he's not really a breakout potential because he's been a solid contributor for 2 years now. But like, I just feel like he hasn't reached his peak yet, or even gotten close to it.
Yeah, I wouldn't call him a breakout, but I could see him being a key part of the offense.
Exactly.
It's funny because I actually just got done writing about Anthony Schwartz being my wide receiver. Completely. I think he's had his moments where he's shined, but I just feel like he hasn't consistently gotten the ball enough, and I think they need to find a way to do that. Looking on the offensive side, my breakout player would have been Mark Anthony Richards. I mean, he had to sit out the entire 2019 season after a leg injury, but when he arrived, I mean, he was compared by Cadillac Williams to Kerryon Johnson. He probably would have been the guy getting the carries behind Boobie Whitlow when he went down, but because he was injured, that went to DJ Williams. And he's such a good receiving back. I really think he'll find his way onto the field this year, and he could be the starting running back by the end of the year, I think.
So I had a couple of players that I have down. Schwartz was one. I agree with everything that everybody said about Schwartz. And Christian, mine was DJ Williams. I know Mark Anthony Richards is going to be a popular pick, and those two are going to battle it out. Either one's right. There's no wrong answer on that. I think DJ Williams could be a potential breakout player just depending upon which way those carries go. And we know Gus doesn't always use a one back. He's used several in the past. He has had years where he's ridden Trey Mason or Kerryon Johnson, but without a bona fide star or somebody with experience, which is very important to Gus, I don't know that necessarily both of those guys will see the field is what I'm saying. And then another one I had, maybe not a breakout, but a question on is what's going to happen with Harold Joyner. They seem to like him. I think he played some of that H-back last year, and maybe a guy that can get some receptions and throw in some carries. So I think DJ Williams could be the back that emerges, or Mark Anthony Richard. I'll go with Williams, but I think that could be key to Auburn's success. The ground game, obviously, as it always is under Gus, and then Joyner. I just want to see what he does this year.
Yeah, I'll never forget. Joyner was the one that dropped that 4th and 1 pass against Georgia in the fourth quarter. I mean, it wasn't his fault. It wasn't his fault. It was a terrible throw by Bo. But I don't know why. Just every time somebody says his name, I immediately think of that play.
Well, as far as offense, my guy would be Nick Brahms, seeing if they can protect Bo, and he's going to be one of the leaders on that offensive line this year. After having 10 starts last year, he should probably have a big season.
Yeah, I mean, is he the only returning starter on the offensive line? So yeah, that's big. So we'll see about that.
If we're talking offensive line, I think another one to look at is Austin Troxel. He's torn his ACL a couple times, but I know a year or two ago, Gus said that he was going to basically be the 6th offensive lineman. I think he'll be the left tackle. I don't know or have been given
They're moving around everywhere too.
Yeah, he's very versatile.
Right. So I think if you're looking to protect Nix, those are your two. Brahms is important because he's the only one that has any experience at all, really. And Troxel is just uber talented, but like Newkirk has had injuries in the past. So if Newkirk can stay healthy on the defensive line and Troxel on the offensive line, then that will bode well for Auburn this fall.
Yeah, and I think Broderius Ham too. I mean, coaches have been talking him up for a while. He's going to start somewhere, whether it's at guard or tackle, and he's going to be a beast for Auburn, just straight up. I mean,
he's huge. He's absolutely huge.
It's funny. So obviously Schwartz was my number 1, but my number 2 was DJ, and then number 3 probably would have been Brahms. So that's pretty funny that both of y'all mentioned, because I'm interested to see what they do with that running back room. Because they got DJ, they got Tank, they got Joyner, Mark Anthony.
Malik Miller still there?
Yeah, Malik Miller is still there as well.
Yeah, he's an honorary member. He's just going to be there forever.
I'm interested to see what they do with that, though, after Whitlow left, because, I mean, it's kind of wide. I'd say it's wide open. I mean, Williams might be the guy in the first couple of games if they don't have, I mean, they're going to have practices, obviously, but they might lean on Williams at the start. But, who knows? Maybe Bigsby comes in, gets some carries, or Mark Anthony. I don't know what they're going to do there.
Don't forget about Shivers now.
That's true. I
mean, he has the most experience out of that entire room, I think, at this point, and Gus loves experience more than anything. Like, so, like, I mean, I wouldn't say he's a 3-down back or anything, but as far as somebody that Gus might trust the most, especially with limited practices and everything like that, like Sean, early in the season, Sean might be the guy that like gets a good bit of the snaps on offense.
All right, guys, before we move on to like our last topic, anyone else have anything they want to talk about before we move on? All right, perfect. So, we've covered the first two kind of game you're most interested in seeing, breakout player. Can y'all just kind of give your overall thoughts on Auburn, like the upcoming season, I guess, for Auburn?
Well, all right, I'll go first. Honestly, like there's a lot of question marks with this Auburn team. The least amount of question marks, or like the spot where there's not really a question mark, is at quarterback and receiver, where they have a lot of talent, and but everywhere else there just seems to be a lot of question marks. Even with running back, where they have a lot of talent waiting there, they just don't know who's going to start, don't know who's going to get majority of carries. Offensive line, you don't know where 4 of them are. Defensive line, you had Marlon, Nick Ho, and Derek Brown leave. Linebacker, actually, they're the most set at, was Kobe McClain, Owen Papo, and KJ Britt. I mean, that might be the top trio in the, not to mention Chandler Wooten, like the top group in the SEC, or one of the top. But there's just a lot of question marks. And with, I keep saying this in my, when I'm bringing up stuff, is that like limited practices and limited stuff like that. Like, I just don't know how well they're going to be acclimated with each other, like this whole group playing together. So that's my biggest thing, is like, I don't, as far as like an outlook of season, like predictions or anything like that, it's just, I think it's the most up in the air this team's been under Malzahn, really.
Yeah, I think you're definitely going to see a lot of changing around and switching players around those first few games. I think, you're not going to really get an idea of who your consistent starters are going to be until pretty far into the season, because of that limited practice and because of that time they haven't had to really work together. I think that's going to make those first several games, maybe a little bit tougher than they necessarily should have been, because you're in such an up in the air about, kind of how everyone's going to play and how everyone's going to respond to each other.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with that. I had written down in my notes a lot hangs in the balance. I mean, all the talent is there. Zach talked about the offensive line, and we talked about breakout players on the offensive line. The talent is there, but will it mesh? Defensive line, you're replacing a lot of those players, and you've got guys like Derek Hall, guys like Connis Miller that could step up, but will they? The linebackers are solid, and then you're going to have almost an entirely new secondary. So we'll have to see what happens there too. I think all the talent is there. This is a team that could make a run this year, but it's also a team that could struggle and fall apart. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how it all shapes out.
I also think a big question is going to be that offensive line. If you can't get the offensive line, I don't know how Bo Nix would respond to that consistent pressure all the time. We've seen him kind of struggle with that in the past, especially, when he starts getting rushed and not feeling protected. He's made some bad passes. He can throw a lot of interceptions. And I think that's going to be a big thing, is he trained enough? Has he gotten it together enough to be able to not rely so much on a steady offensive line and to make plays and to make something happen?
Well, and another interesting thing that I know is Jack Bunnell's the new offensive line coach. They had J.B. Grimes, who's more of an old school coach from everything I know. And I just wonder how Bunnell will mesh that unit together with the lack of spring practice, the uncertainty going into the fall, all the new starters. Like we said, Brahms is important, Troxel's important. Those two, I think, will start. Yes, there's no really questioning that, and probably Brodarius Ham, but we couldn't sit down and tell you all 5 right now, and I don't think Auburn's coaching staff could tell you the 5 guys that they're going to have up front right now. So Bo Nix's development, along with the development of an offensive line, will be key. Now, Auburn might be in a little bit of a better spot than some other schools with quarterback, because like we talked about, Jamie Newman's new. LSU's breaking in a new quarterback, and what I would think is Miles Brennan. Alabama's breaking in a new quarterback, and I would assume with the circumstances given, be Mac Jones. So there's some opportunities in the SEC West, specifically with Mississippi State having a new quarterback, new system that is whole different philosophy in Mike Leach's philosophy now. He has a grad transfer from Stanford, KJ Costello, who can sling it. So maybe Auburn has a hands up because of Nick's year of experience and his abilities, but the offensive line's a concern. And then on the defensive end, I agree with what Zach and some of the others have said. The defensive line's going to have to step up. You don't replace Derek Brown. Great job at linebacker by Travis Williams to sustain excellence over the last 3-4 years. KJ Britt's going to be good. Papo, there's a lot of guys, and then the secondary. So I think this is a team that could lose some games. I don't know that necessarily with the A&M and Georgia back-to-back and LSU and Alabama back-to-back within 2-game stretches in the year. I don't know if they can go 2-0 in both those 2-game stretches, but only time will tell if they're even able to play. So that's the breakdown that I have.
I completely agree with you, Jake. Like, in a normal year, I say this is a 5-loss team, just off the bat. You're looking at the roster. But now you have to think about COVID, and will there be scout team players? How early are they going to get hit? And what if a player goes out who's in the starting lineup? He has to be quarantined. These are all things you kind of have to start thinking about. And in a year where most of your guys are trying to learn and get better for next year, that there's so many wrenches that can just be thrown in.
And that's a really
with
good point
that,
you make. Go ahead, Zach.
Go ahead. Okay, well, I was gonna say, well, with the what you're saying, like, yeah, that does like that, but that's gonna be with all the other teams as well. Like, like Mac Jones could get COVID. He's out for 2 weeks, and it's like the week of the Iron Bowl, like, or anything like that, or Bryce Young, whoever starts for Bama. But so like, yeah, like that's a situation that Auburn is facing, but it's also a situation that everybody else is facing. So it might just even out, might cancel out, and their schedule or their record might equal that of a normal year just because of the weirdness that this season might have.
But with how young this team might affect Auburn more.
What was that?
Like how young Auburn is this year?
Yeah, that's true.
All right, well, I don't know if everyone has anything else they want to add, but I just want to thank everybody for coming by and doing this. I really appreciated it. And I want to thank everybody who's followed along with the State of the SEC coverage this week. We really tried Media Day. SEC Media Days was postponed. So I know that next week was supposed to be SEC Media Days. So we really wanted to kind of bring that SEC Media Day environment kind of to our readers. So that's why we talked to all the SEC editors from each college. We really appreciated them helping us out. And then we really wanted to bring some of our alumni back, kind of talk about Auburn, what we expect for a season, if there even is a season. So I just want to thank everybody for coming by and doing this.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having us, Jake.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. It was fun.